Hello, and welcome to MIT Sloan Alumni Online. Every month, MIT Sloan Alumni Online brings you the latest breaking news, cutting-edge research, groundbreaking ideas, and school updates from MIT Sloan faculty and alumni. Today, we are pleased to have Kevin Flake joining us. After graduating from Union College with a BA in political science, Kevin enlisted in the United States Army, earned the Green Beret, and served as a Special Forces engineer assigned to the 1st Special Forces Group, where he deployed to the Philippines, Thailand, and twice to Afghanistan. In 2011, during his second deployment to Afghanistan, he suffered a gunshot wound to the lower abdomen and was medically retired due to his injuries. He has since founded Wounded by War But Never Broken, an organization aimed at helping others by sharing his experience and lessons in resilience. In the spring of 2016, Kevin completed dual master's degrees from the MIT Sloan School of Management and the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. He is married and has 2 daughters and currently works for ThreadStack, a cloud-based cybersecurity firm here in Boston. Kevin, thank you for being with us today. I'll now turn it over to you.
Kathy, thank you very much for having me here today. It's an absolute honor to be able to speak at this event here.
You have to click on the slides. There you go.
Sorry. Okay. Technical difficulties. I used to say that I was the least technical person to go to the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, so it's very fitting. So I could never fully appreciate how much I needed the support of others and how hard it was to ask for help until I was 27 years old and a single bullet taught me these lessons. Over 5 years ago, I walked through the doors of MIT Sloan for the first time and asked the Sloan Admissions Committee to take a chance on me. Their decision to admit me not only changed the trajectory of my life, but it also helped to save it. My journey began at Union College, a small liberal arts school in upstate New York. I was a student there from 2002 to 2006. I majored in political science. During this period, the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan began to escalate, and I typically found myself in the minority at this Northeastern liberal arts school because I supported both of the wars. I knew that if I verbally supported something that had such grave consequences as war, that I needed to physically support it also. So after an exhaustive search, I decided that I wanted to be a Green Beret because their motto, De Oppresso Liber, to free the oppressed, spoke to me. Green Berets are like consultants for the United States Army. We work on 12-man teams consisting of highly specialized and skilled men that travel to foreign countries to train their militaries and their militias. Knowing languages and local culture is paramount to the success of the Green Beret mission. And in the case of Iraq and Afghanistan, you go to combat with these men. And during the most intense periods of your life, the man to the left and right of you will not be an American, but rather a local national soldier that you've been training. So it was a very unpopular decision for me to join the military. Out of my graduating class of 508 at Union, only 4 joined the military, and I was the only person to enlist. People could not understand why I was making this decision, especially when I was walking away from the opportunity to join my family's business, which was a multi-million-dollar business at the time. But no matter what people told me, I knew deep down this was what I needed to be doing with my life. And on March 7th, 2007, it was time for me to head to Fort Benning, Georgia, to begin my journey. And while I waited in the Albany, New York International Airport, the gravity of the situation hit me. And as I began sobbing in the middle of the airport, I realized that my whole life was about to change. And at 22 years old, I had the toughest decision of my young life to make. Do I walk out of the airport, or do I get on the airplane and begin this very uncertain journey? My mind and body told me to get out of the airport, but my heart and my gut told me I needed to get on the airplane. Now, it took me 2 years to earn the Green Beret. And during the process, I was pushed physically and mentally beyond anything I thought humanly possible. At one point during training, I went an entire week without eating and didn't sleep for 3 days on the back end. And during another training iteration, it was so intense, I lost 30 pounds in 1 month. But when I put on my beret for the first time, I was vindicated. I had taken the hard road, and it was absolutely worth it. I made a promise to myself that I would never listen to the naysayers and always take the hard road, especially when I knew it was the path that I needed to be on. In this moment of joy and triumph, I could not fully comprehend how difficult the Special Forces lifestyle would be for my wife and I. Within 2 months of being assigned to the 1st Special Forces Group at Fort Lewis, Washington, I was deployed to the Philippines for 2 months. 4 months after returning from the Philippines, I was deployed to Afghanistan for a 7-month rotation. And throughout this deployment, I often found myself thanking God that I had endured such difficult training in the Special Forces course. Because if I had not, in the moments when my teammates and other people depended on me most, there was no doubt in my mind I would have quit on them. Now, I tried to find a couple of pictures that would encapsulate the difficulty of my deployments. The first one shows me sitting next to my Humvee. We would spend extended periods of time living out of our truck, sometimes up to a week or 2 at a time. And you could bring whatever you wanted on that mission as long as it fit into your backpack, and mine was right behind me. And so in those moments, I found the ability to just derive pleasure out of the simple things in life. Like having the ability to brush my teeth that morning was very big for me. Things that we take for granted on a daily basis now. And the next picture there, that's me. I hadn't slept in 3 days. It would be another 24 hours before myself and my team would actually have the opportunity to get some sleep. So after the most trying 7-month period of my life, my team was back in the States on a Friday, and when we came into work on Monday, we were told, "Great job, boys. You're going back again in 7 months." So during our 7 months off, our team had to deploy to Thailand for a month and a half and perform 2 separate training cycles. My team would only end up being home for 4 months in 2 years. And our 7 months off went by in a flash. And when I got back to Afghanistan, I felt like I had never left. Well, luckily, we went back to the same base and trained the same Afghan commandos. And so when we hit the ground running. 7 months into our deployment, our 11-month deployment, on September 25th, 2011, my Special Forces team and the Afghan commandos found ourselves engaged in an intense firefight with hardened Taliban fighters in the mountains of northwest Afghanistan. In the 10th hour of the firefight, while going around the corner of a building, it felt as if I had been hit in the stomach with a sledgehammer. And while I was suspended in midair, I thought to myself, I think I've just been shot. And as my body slammed off the ground, I realized that I had indeed just been shot. The pain was so great, I had to summon what little energy I had left just to remain conscious. I crawled back to my radio and called my teammates to let them know that I had been shot. And while they desperately maneuvered under heavy fire to my position, I began trying to medically treat myself, but there was nothing I could do. Minutes felt like years as the pain pulsated through my body and I lay exposed to enemy fire. I called my teammates again to let them know how dire the situation was, but they were pinned down by heavy volumes of fire. And when I got off the radio the second time, I looked up and saw an Afghan soldier who had spent the better part of 2 years training. Bullets flew around us as he dragged me behind the building, and just as my teammates began flooding in. And while people frantically provided medical care, team members asked our medic if I was going to make it. He said, "I don't know. It looks pretty bad." Now, little did they know, I could hear them the entire time. Wasn't exactly what I wanted to hear at that moment. Teammates that had not paid me a compliment in years began coming up to me with tears in their eyes, telling me that they loved me. And that's when it hit me. I was going to die. I had so many close calls before, but I thought this time was it. And while all this was going on, a young soldier who was attached to our team, he had his helmet camera running. And so this picture here was grabbed from his helmet camera. And this is a picture of my teammates, the Afghan commandos, carrying me on a stretcher to the helicopter landing zone for the medical bird. And they had to go through open areas. And during this, while they were going through these open areas to transport me to the HLZ, they returned fire, or they were receiving fire from the enemy and returned fire the entire time. This picture here is me getting loaded onto the helicopter. 45 minutes after I was wounded, I did get loaded onto this helicopter. And after a 15-minute ride, I arrived at the field hospital. Almost immediately, nurses began cutting off my uniform, while others prepared for an emergency surgery. After a series of questions from the surgeon, he finally asked, "Do you have any questions?" I asked, "Am I going to die?" He said, "I'm not sure. It looks pretty bad. Hang in there. Do you have any last requests?" And at this point, I thought death was certain. So I asked for a Catholic priest to give me my last rites, and if he could, please save the bullet. And when he put the anesthesia mask on my face, I asked God for forgiveness for my sins and said goodbye to this world. My first recollection occurred 4 days later, when I asked someone if I had gone to heaven or hell. I was relieved when they said neither. You're in Landstuhl Regional Medical Center in Germany. And in the intensive care unit in Landstuhl, I was in such great pain that I could barely lift my head off the pillow. But the sense of relief that I felt was unparalleled to anything I have ever experienced in my life. My injuries were severe. 20% of my colon had been removed. My hip was fractured, and my left leg was paralyzed due to femoral nerve damage that I incurred. But I was alive. I had a second chance at life. However, I could not comprehend how much of an impact this would have on mine and my family's life. Within days of getting out of the hospital, my wife encouraged me to plan for the future and bought me a book called How to Get into a Top MBA Program. Now, every day after 6 hours of physical therapy, I would come home and devour that book. I made notes in the margins, highlights on sections and pages, and began making plans to start studying for my GREs. However, after several months, the initial rush of being alive wore off, and my optimism for the future dwindled. And while my stomach and hip healed, my left leg had atrophied so much that it was the size of my left arm. A doctor at the University of Washington Neurology Clinic could barely read my MRI because there was so much scar tissue, and told my wife and I that there was nothing he could do. At the same time that I received this news, my teammate, Sergeant First Class Benjamin Wise, was killed in action just 2 weeks before the remainder of my Special Forces team was due home. Ben was the third soldier in our company to be killed on this deployment, and the second boy in his family to die fighting in Afghanistan. And shortly after our company returned home, we lost a fourth soldier, this time to suicide. Well, luckily for me, the Mayo Clinic was willing to try an experimental surgery on me that involved grafting a nerve from my left leg into my stomach. And when I woke up from this surgery, I was in even worse pain than when I had been shot. So in total now I've had 6 surgeries that have left me with over 40 inches of scars. I've had to perform thousands of hours of physical therapy just to relearn simple tasks like walking and navigating stairs, things I had taken granted my whole life. I went from being a former college football player who served in the Army's most elite unit to a man that needed help putting on his socks. Early on in my recovery, while my wife was giving me a sponge bath, I asked her for a divorce. And in her direct New England style, she said, "No, asshole. Do you think if I wanted a divorce, I'd be giving you a sponge bath right now?" But for months on end, I was in constant pain and barely slept. I spent long, sleepless nights on my couch with a drink in my hand and tears on my face, questioning God why he let me survive my injuries, only to suffer so much. And I also struggled with this question. Why did I survive when Ben Wise, Wyatt Goldsmith, and Mike Hosey did not? At this point, pills and alcohol became a crutch for me to help deal with the gravity of the situation. And as I descended further and further down this dark path, I began isolating myself from others. Bitterness, anger, and cynicism began to take over my heart. A once promising future began to seem like a dim reality until several events put my life back on track. 8 months after my injuries, I knew something was wrong when I went 3 consecutive nights without sleeping. Reluctantly, I finally decided to ask for help and began a dialogue with the 1st Special Forces Group psychologist. Initially, our conversations were brief. However, over time, I began to trust him more and more. He put me through a meditation workshop to help me decrease my stress, which decreased my pain levels and helped me sleep. And I also began doing yoga and acupuncture. And like so many others, I struggled to get off of my prescription narcotics. When I left the Mayo Clinic, I was prescribed 12 pills of Dilaudid, 12 Percocet, and 2 Valium a day. That's a total of 26 pills a day. At the time, I needed every pill because the pain I felt when I woke up from my last surgery was worse than when I was shot. Several months after the surgery, I was able to work my way down to 1 or 3 pills a day. However, I could not kick those last few. 11 months after my initial injuries, and 6 months after my last surgery, my wife finally intervened. She asked me, "Is this it? Is this what you are going to do with the rest of your life?" And I shot back with, "It's only 1 or 2 pills a day." I played the wounded veteran card, but she wasn't having any of it. She said, "It's 1 or 2 today, and next year it's 2 to 3, and the year after that it's 3 to 4, and the next thing you know, you're addicted." She also reminded me of my aspirations to earn my MBA. This was the angriest I had ever been with my wife in our 15-year relationship. But after thinking about what she said, I realized she was right. I drew a line in the sand and stopped taking painkillers. And the next day, I began studying for my graduate school exams. And when I scored a 17% on my first practice exam, I realized just how much work and focus this endeavor would take. At the same time that my wife intervened, a friend and fellow Green Beret that suffered similar wounds reached out to me for help. And while my recovery was incredibly tough, it was still going better than others. And this is a picture of my friend and I after a 10-hour firefight in 2010. This picture was taken before both of us were injured. So at the time that my friend reached out to me, though, I wondered if someone in my condition could actually help someone else. However, after just a couple visits, I realized how impactful this experience was for the both of us. And when I stopped taking painkillers, I thought about them every day. However, my friend looked up to me, and because of that, I knew I had to set a good example for him and for all of my brothers and sisters who are out there struggling. His willingness to seek help and admiration for me forced my moral compass to stay north. And he was also someone that I could completely confide in. Because up until this point, I had been wearing a mask to cover up the pain and anguish I was experiencing. And because we shared similar injuries and experiences, it allowed me to take my mask off and finally tell someone that I was having a tough time. And knowing that he was not alone in his struggles gave him the hope and strength to eventually conquer his demons. And from that point on, when we struggled together. And my friend went on to graduate from an Ivy League university and now works in investment banking. Asking for help, accepting help, and giving help to others began to put my life back on track. But there were still numerous speed bumps ahead. I applied to 3 graduate schools: Harvard Business School, the Harvard Kennedy School, and MIT Sloan. For everyone out there attempting graduate school, I recommend you apply to more than those 3. I was rejected by both Harvard institutions. However, I was waitlisted at MIT. And when I found this out, I bought a plane ticket from Seattle to Boston. I flew across the country, walked up to the admissions office unannounced. I thanked them for the spot on the wait list, and then I asked them what I actually needed to do to get into the school. 3 months later, I had an acceptance letter in my hands. And after just 2 years after being wounded, I retired from the Army. I began school at MIT. And that fall, I swallowed my pride and reapplied to the Harvard Kennedy School and was accepted to pursue concurrent master's degrees. Now, despite this great fortune to attend both institutions, my struggles still continued. During my first term of business school, I had never felt so out of place in my life. I rarely had anything in common with my classmates and often found myself unsure of what I should even talk to them about. Academically, I struggled to understand the complex concepts and vernacular. Even after everything I had been through, special forces training, deployments, and being severely injured, I had never wanted to quit something more than my first year of business school. And when my grades were released after my first term, I was embarrassed. I had never worked so hard to attain below average results. That winter, I was once again humbled. At 29 years old, I found myself going on my first job interview. And as a Green Beret from MIT, I thought companies would trip over themselves for me. However, after going on 17 interviews, I ended up being rejected by 16 companies. The bitterness, anger, and cynicism that I had been dealing with grew to an all-time high after a rough semester and being rejected by 16 out of 17 companies. I looked down on others and I blamed everyone but myself until I had an epiphany that spring. If 16 out of 17 companies said no to me, it wasn't them, it was me. But during Special Forces training, when times were tough, I used to remind myself that I was in a situation of my own making. During the first year of business school, I had to consistently remind myself that nobody made me go to MIT. I took a hard look at my character, demeanor, and how I was approaching life. I made a consistent daily effort to better myself through meditation, journaling, yoga, and talking to others. I let go of the negative thoughts that ran rampant through my mind. I sought out mentorship from veterans and non-veterans. Professor Donald Stoll and numerous classmates spent countless hours helping me with my coursework and thinking about my life post-MBA. I asked the Career Development Office for help and accepted their critiques. My outlook, attitude, and friendships improved, and the next time I interviewed a year later, I had my pick of jobs. Now, I've often heard that there are three things that never return in life: a spoken word, a spent bullet, and a neglected opportunity. I think about every word that I say. And when I was deployed, I agonized over every round that I sent downrange. And after being wounded by a bullet that can never be taken back, I made a promise to my fallen brothers that I would not waste my second chance at life. To do this, I realized I needed to forgive others for what they had done to me. But most importantly, I needed to forgive myself for the way I had acted and treated others. And during my last year of graduate school, I also realized that there would never be a point in my life where I could say that I was 100% physically and mentally healed. I began to understand that for the rest of my life, I would need to put a daily effort in so that I could fulfill my promise to my fallen brothers. On a daily basis, 7 years later, I still practice meditation, yoga, journaling, acupuncture, exercise, and most importantly, I continue to talk with others. In the spring of 2016, I graduated from Harvard and MIT. I worked for Goldman Sachs for almost 2 years, and currently I'm the Director of Strategic Projects at ThreatStack, a cloud-based cybersecurity firm here in Boston. My wife stayed true to her marriage vows and has stuck with me through sickness and in health. Our family has grown to include 2 little girls and what feels like thousands of Disney princess costumes and dolls. But none of this would have been possible if early on in my recovery I had not sought help, accepted help, and began helping others. I used to question why I endured such suffering, but 7 years later, with the support of so many, I know why. In addition to being the best father, husband, and man that I can be, the purpose of my life is to share the lessons I learned from the toughest period of my life so that others might turn a tragedy into a triumph. I take it from a man that has been through hell and back. There is a light at the end of the tunnel, and it burns brighter than you can imagine. And so some key takeaways that I would like everybody to hopefully have taken away from this is, the first one is take the hard road. I always think back to that very pivotal moment in my life where I was at the Albany airport getting ready to go to basic training. And I faced that decision to either leave or get on the airplane and start this journey. And I just think about how different my life would be if I walked out of there. And I think about the regret that I would have to constantly think of, or be plagued with. And so I just realized that in life, when you're faced with 2 decisions, and one of them's easier and one of them's the hard path, and the hard road is the one you need to be on, you need to take that 10 out of 10 times. Because otherwise, you're going to be plagued with regret the rest of your life. And for me, that's personally something I never want to have to deal with. Don't feel sorry for yourself. Very early on in my recovery, I hated when people felt sorry for me in the condition that I was in. And so that taught me that I needed to not feel sorry for myself also. During my recovery, I was consistently surrounded by men who had lost their arms, they had lost their legs, and they'd been burned from head to toe. And I had a lot of friends that lost their lives either in combat or by suicide. And so I realized that no matter how bad I thought it, other people had it worse than me. And so I never could lose that perspective during the recovery, and I still try to keep that perspective today when I'm having a bad day or my body hurts or something's going on. Just how lucky I am to be in the position and the condition that I'm in. Don't self-select. My instructors during the Special Forces course consistently told us this while we were students. And basically, this means that you will quit on yourself much sooner than other people will quit on you. And so in the situation in the Special Forces course, basically they were saying, Leave it up to the decision of the cadre, of the instructors, to determine if you will make it or not. If you quit, you guarantee your fate. But if you stick around, you leave it in the hands of others. And so this is something I would remind myself during my recovery. I was very uncertain as to what was going to happen. I didn't know how it would turn out. But I knew I could guarantee the outcome if I quit. It would just be the condition that I was in. And when I was getting ready to apply to schools like Harvard and MIT, people told me I was crazy. Thank God I didn't self-select myself out of that situation, and I followed my gut and I applied to those schools. Ask for help, accept help, and give help. I mean, this is an absolute cornerstone of my life. If you're out there struggling, there is no need for you to go at it alone, because I can guarantee that there's somebody else out there that is having the same problems that you are. And just like with my friend who'd suffered the same injuries, we both thought that we were on an island by ourselves. But when we were able to link up together, we were able to help each other and really further along our recovery. And there's also people out there that want to help you. And even if you think you're not in a position to give help to others, trust me, you are. As I mentioned earlier, I always keep the perspective that somebody else is worse off than me at all times. I can guarantee that. And when you're out there giving help to others, it gives you that perspective of how lucky you actually are. So life is a daily effort. Success in life, feeling good, being happy, having a great family, having a great life is a daily effort. I say every day I wake up and I'm a new person, and I need to make myself into the person that I want to be, especially if I want today to be better than yesterday. And so that's just something I would consistently have to remind myself, when I came to that conclusion that this was for the rest of my life, I would need to do certain things in my life just to be able to achieve the goals that I wanted to. And when I realized that life is a daily effort, the burden of performing those tasks became less and less. Now, if you're interested in learning more, you can go to my website, www.woundedbywar.com. You can follow me on Facebook at Wounded by War. There's a Facebook page. I'm also on Instagram at Wounded by War. And if we didn't cover some of the topics you wanted to, or you wanted to dig into things a little bit more, any questions or anything, please feel free to email me at kevinflike52@gmail.com. And so thank you very much. And I understand that we have some questions coming up, and I look forward to answering them.
Kevin, thank you so much for sharing your incredible story and for the honest and hopeful account of your experience. We appreciate it. So thank you again. And so as a reminder to our participants, please type in questions in the Q&A box on the right side of the screen. Take a moment to make sure that you've selected all panelists before submitting your questions. And while you're doing that, I'd like to tell you a little bit about some upcoming MIT Sloan Alumni Online events. On August 16th, Megan McCormick, MBA 2018, will discuss building a design-led company in West Africa. She's the CEO and co-founder of OZE, a mission-driven for-profit startup. And you can learn more about Megan and register for this session by visiting MIT Sloan Alumni Online website, where you'll also find links to our previously recorded sessions. So now let's move on to spotlight questions. So we'll start with Lynn McCann, SF07 in Hamilton, Virginia. And Kevin, Lynn asks, how did you maintain a positive attitude during your recovery?
Well, I think if you asked my wife, she wouldn't say that my attitude was always positive, but did my best to try to keep it that way. And one of the things that I thought quite a bit about during my recovery to keep a positive attitude was a lot of people, the outpouring of support after I was wounded was unbelievable. I grew up in a small town in upstate New York called Stillwater, and went to a small all-boys Catholic military school and small northeastern liberal arts school, so very tight-knit communities that I came from. The outpouring of support was unbelievable, and that support was able to keep my mind positive, to remind myself that I could do this. And it also showed me how much people believed in me, that I could overcome something as life-altering as this. And so when I had these negative thoughts that would begin to creep into my mind, I just thought about all the people that believed in me and that supported me. And, ultimately, I really just did not want to let them down. And during some very dark periods of time, this was enough to just keep me going. And I knew that if I could just keep putting one foot in front of the other, very similar to how it was when I was at Special Forces selection. Selection was a 30-day event, followed by a 30-mile road march at the end. And I would just tell myself some days that, when I was at selection, that I needed to put one foot in front of the other. And eventually I'd get to the end. And I would try to take it one meal at a time. And if I couldn't make it to the meal, then sometimes I need to go hour by hour, and some days I need to go minute by minute. And so that taught me the mental toughness of keeping that positive attitude. And during the recovery, I tried to do the same thing. And there were days where I just had to put one foot in front of the other, but I knew if I could keep doing that, I would get to where I wanted to go.
Thank you. Our next question is from Julius Danke, MFIN 2015, and Julius is in Brooklyn. In the periods of darkness and depression that often follow grave injuries, what kept you sane, and how did you get through that time?
I think some of the things, there's a couple different things that other people did for me and I did for myself. Talking to the psychologist, just having somebody to talk to about what was going on, being transparent with him, being transparent with my buddy who had the same injuries as me was very helpful, just to let me know that I wasn't alone in my thoughts and what were going on. Learning alternative ways to deal with my stress. My stress levels, very much correlated to my pain levels. So doing meditation, doing yoga, acupuncture, seeking out these alternative methods, to deal, I think, with certain things were able to really help boost me up out of a pretty dark and depressive state. And I think another thing, too, that I recommend to other people, and this is what helped me through the recovery period to get me out of these dark periods, is I had very lofty goals, right? I wanted to go to a top MBA program. I think this was pretty difficult considering my below average test scores and GPA that I had to overcome with my application. And so I had these two goals, right? To go to a top MBA program and to eventually run again. Both ones that I think most people thought that I was crazy for wanting to achieve. Some people thought that I might never walk again unless I had the assistance of braces or crutches. And so I always kept these lofty goals at the end. They were the light at the end of the tunnel. But when you set lofty goals that have a very long period to them, you have to set small milestones along the way. Otherwise, it's going to be very easy for you to lose sight of those goals at the end. And so I would set these small milestones for myself. Like, before I could get my MBA, I would need to get off my pain meds. And then I would need to take my GREs. And then I would need to do my applications. And then I would need to do interviews. And the same thing with running. Before I could run, I needed to get out of the wheelchair. I needed to be able to walk again and do these small little things. But when I hit these milestones, I made sure I celebrated them, so that I didn't lose sight of my accomplishments and achievements and then the goals that I had at the end.
That's great. Our next spotlight question, our last spotlight question is from Robert Wasson, SM77. Robert's in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and asks, what is the importance of teamwork and what are the steps to build it?
I would not be where I am today if it wasn't for a group of people, hundreds of people who have just put so many hours into, my recovery. And it goes back to, my first memories. There's just people, I think of coaches, I think of teachers that have been pivotal in making me the man that I am today. And so I think that teamwork, your life is a teamwork event. There's no way you can go at it alone. In terms of the teamwork to push our goals forward, being on a Special Forces team taught me so much about teamwork. When the team was working well together and we were helping one another out, we were an unstoppable force. But when we weren't working together, there was really nothing we could do. And luckily, 99% of the time, we were on the same page and we were going pretty well. And the lessons I took from being on the 12-man Special Forces team were that everybody was cross-trained in everybody else's capabilities. And so for a company, for instance, like I think it's important for people to know other people's jobs. You don't have to be the subject matter expert at it, but you at least have to know at a low level of what that job entails. So that when something happens, you're able to jump in and fill the gap for a little while. But then you also have the perspective of what your other teammate is doing and how difficult their job is. Another aspect of the Special Forces team was that, we weren't micromanaged. We had this element of trust amongst one another that we were going to make the right decision. And if we made a bad decision, it was because we thought that that was the best decision to make at that time. And so having that knowledge base of other people's jobs and having the trust amongst our teammates, I think really increased the teamwork aspect, which increased our efficiency and, made us really just get out there and do some great work. So I think some steps to build it, especially within a company, would be, make sure you know what other people's jobs are, right? Understand what they're doing, understand what the struggles are that they face and the tasks that they have to accomplish so that when you ask them to do something, you have a good idea of what you're asking them to do. And then I would say, trust. I think that that's something that needs to be out there more and more. Trust the people that you're working with. You have to trust. You have no choice if you want to achieve great things. You have to trust the people that you are working with.
Well, Kevin, I want to, before we start with some other live questions, I want to tell you that several people have expressed their thanks to you for sharing your story and also for your service. So, and now I have a question. As you know, supporting veterans when they return has been a constant struggle for the United States. And what would you recommend we do to make sure more veterans have the support that they need?
I think that one thing that would be very helpful, especially for this audience here, that transition period was terrible for me. As I said, I never wanted to quit anything more in my entire life than when I was at my first year of business school here. Oftentimes I think veterans find themselves very much out of place in a society where less and less people are serving in the military. So I think that, what could be very helpful, especially with this audience here, is as veterans get out, they need some guidance. They need a mentor. They need somebody to help them along the way. That's something that everybody, if you're successful in the military, you had a mentor in the military. And I really underestimated how much I needed a mentor when I got out of the military. Once I started to find that mentorship, things were considerably easier for me. But also I had to express some humility and accept those critiques. And so I think that one thing that could be very helpful, especially from this audience, would be to, help veterans think about their transition. What are they good at? Right? What makes them excited? What industries could they transfer that excitement and those skills to? Get them just thinking along that process. And then from there, start thinking about the jobs that they could do within those industries. And then putting together a resume. This is an incredibly difficult process for me. How do I translate those skill sets over to a resume? And then helping them think about an internship, interviews and how to prepare for that. And so there's a lot of various organizations out there, and I know that they would love to have folks like you to volunteer your time. And it's really, honestly, not that big of a commitment to be able to give this. I know that I would spend an hour or two a month with mentors that I had. That hour or two a month helped change my life. And, I go back to some people and I say, hey, you remember when you said this to me? It was so impactful. It just really hit a light bulb for me. And it's funny because sometimes they won't even remember that conversation, but it was just so impactful for me in that moment. So, the amount of impact that you can have in a short period of time can be pretty great.
Kevin, one of your takeaways was to give help, and I wonder if you could give some examples of how one can actually encourage resilience in others.
Mm-hmm. When I think of encouraging resilience in others, I think of it on two levels, as an organizational level and on a personal level. And so on the organizational level, I think it's the preparedness. We were prepared for almost everything in Special Forces, and then we would prepare for everything for a mission, and then we'd go on the mission, and the complete opposite things would happen, and things would happen that we had never even thought of. But the fact that we had spent so much time preparing for things made us resilient, made us trust one another, and made us understand that we could handle whatever situation that was put in front of us. And I always took comfort in that on these missions, that I had prepared myself to 100% of my ability. There was nothing else more that I could have done. It gave me a lot of confidence going into those situations. And so I think the more prepared you can be, the more confident you'll be. So when things start to go haywire in an organization, you're going to be calm, cool, collected, and be able to start making those decisions. And I think also, too, installing resilience in others and within your organization, fail early and often. Allow people to fail on a consistent basis so that they can learn and profit from their mistakes. From a very early age, I look back, I'd always been taking on leadership positions, whether it's captain of a sports team, president of my fraternity. I made terrible mistakes. I continue to make terrible mistakes. But I just try not to make those mistakes twice. And so I think that if you can bring that element into your environment, make it an environment where people feel like they can make decisions and have the ability to make mistakes and have a learning opportunity, then you're going to come up with a very resilient organization. On a personal level, installing resilience in others, for me, like I said, when I wake up in the morning, I know I'm a new person. And it's my job to get myself back to the level that I need to, so that I'm not letting down the people in my life that depend on me, like my children, my wife, the 150 other employees that I work with. And so installing resilience in others, I think, is just identifying the aspects of your life that are tough for you, right? So stress was a big thing for me. And so I know how to combat that through yoga, acupuncture, journaling, so that my levels are low. And I also start to understand, when something is getting very stressful for me, I can combat that situation. And so I think developing a routine for you that is going to be tailored specific to you, right? Because everything that works for me might not work for you. And that will be something that just allows you to set yourself up for success on a daily basis, so that when you go into work or you go into life and things start going haywire, you have the ability and the coping mechanisms to deal with it.
Can you take that idea of encouraging resilience and talk a little bit in terms of giving advice to parents about resilience in their children?
It's something I try to do on a daily basis with a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old, and sometimes I wonder if they're more resilient than I want them to be. But I think back a lot to my childhood, right? I grew up in this very small town in upstate New York. My father and mother both grew up in that town. They went to high school there. An incredible environment for me to grow up in, with coaches, teachers, mentors in that area. Like I said, that made me the person that I am today. And when my father graduated from high school, he graduated second to last in his high school class, 74 out of 75. He didn't finish college, but he had this vision in life that he wanted to make money, and he didn't want to ever work for anybody. And so he had this vision, and he knew if he worked hard enough, he could attain it. And so he was a serial entrepreneur. After I'd say probably a dozen different iterations, he finally found, what his path would be. And he owned dollar stores that were very successful in the late 80s, throughout the 90s and early 2000s. And that success really helped to change the trajectory of my life. And I was privy to this the whole time. From a very young age, I think when I was 10 years old, we were required to work 20 hours a week in the summertime. And then whenever there was a break, we would have to work. And so my family, we went to school, we played sports, and we worked at the family business. But what it did for me was it showed me the ability to have this goal and this vision. And if you put the hard work in there, then you will attain that vision. And it just showed me, how difficult it can be along the way to attain that vision. But if you're willing to put the time and the effort in, you will attain that. And my mother, I think, what she did was, she just instilled this confidence in myself and my 2 younger brothers. Every day before we went to school, she would kiss us on the cheek, and she would say, "Remember, you're a Flike, you're an achiever." She chose her words carefully. She didn't say we deserved anything. She said we were achievers. That meant we had to get out there, We had to go to school, and we had to get after it, and we had to achieve everything that came to us. And so that confidence that she instilled in me, I would see my father. He had the vision. He had the goal. She supported him. He had this, and he was able to go out and execute on it. And then the confidence that my mother had in him and the confidence that my mother had in her children to go out and do great things. In fact, she'd actually tell us all the time, like, you are going to do great things in life. And she meant it 100%. It made me understand that there was nothing in life that I couldn't achieve if I put my mind to it. And I came to realize that, if another man had achieved something, then there was no reason that I couldn't achieve that goal also.
Thank you, Kevin. There's a couple of questions about your time here at Sloan, and I wonder if you could maybe just talk a little bit about either the biggest challenge or the most rewarding part of your experience at Sloan.
Yeah, I think the initial challenge for me was, I could list so many. Coming from a liberal arts background, the math, the quantitative nature of it was pretty brutal for me. And so to give you an idea, right, I got out of the Army. I moved across the country. I had about 1 week between moving, starting class. My wife and I had our first child a week before midterms, and I just retired from the Army. So a lot of life changes all in once. And the challenge of it was just learning the material, transitioning into civilian life, and just feeling like I'd fit in. And at the time, too, I was still in quite a bit of pain. I can remember long days here at Sloan. I would just have to lay down sometimes in the study rooms because my back hurt so much. And so getting through that was probably the greatest challenge. And I think sticking it out, honestly, to graduation, seeing it end to end was the most rewarding from that, because it really just showed me once again what I was capable of doing. If I put my mind to it. And I think one of the more rewarding things also too was the level of personal growth that I was able to get, from enduring this experience, through going through this, suffering through it, and then also just what I learned from my classmates, my peers, and professors.
Great. We have time for one more question, and I'm hoping that you could tell us a little bit about the founding of your organization, your foundation, and perhaps share a little bit about the support and resources that you might recommend. We've had some people ask about that as well.
Yes. So when I was working with my friend who I'd showed in the slide earlier, I felt really good about it, and I wanted to reach people on a broader audience. So I thought that it would be great for me to start a blog and be very transparent about my experiences and what I was going through. Initially, I thought that my audience was just going to be other wounded veterans, but pretty quickly I understood that the message and what I had been through could be inspiring to other people. And so really I just kind of tried to expand the aperture on it and open up my experiences from end to end to try to inspire people as much as I possibly could. So just try to get that out there through the website, through Facebook, through Instagram. Do a lot of public speaking. I probably did 25 different events last year, telling my story. And I just feel obligated now to everybody out there who has helped me to go out there and share my story now, because I feel like an experience is worth nothing unless you share it. Some other things, organizations that you could be helpful with through your time, through your money. The Green Beret Foundation, which I'm an ambassador for, has been there for my wife and I since day one. They provided so much stuff when the Department of Defense and the United States Army, when the bureaucratic nature of that slowed the process down, the Green Beret Foundation was able to step right in. The Sentinels of Freedom is a scholarship foundation out in California that were able to help my wife, I, and our family out financially while I was at graduate school, and to really ease the burden of that. So the only thing I had to think about was my recovery and going forward.
That's great. Kevin, thank you so much for sharing your inspiring story. I want to thank all of our Sloan alumni and friends for joining us. To keep the conversation going over social media, please use the hashtag SloanieChat. We hope you'll be able to join future MIT Sloan Alumni Online events, which are made possible in part by the Sloan Annual Fund. As today's event comes to a close, please take a moment to complete the brief survey that will automatically pop up on your screen. Thank you for joining MIT Sloan Alumni Online, and thank you again, Kevin.
Thank you, Kathy.